Okay, we're going to start to look at monopolistic competition. Really important that we see from the outset that with monopolistic competition, what we have is we have a product that is slightly different from its rivals. In other words, it's slightly differentiated. And that means that if you raise the price as a firm, then we're not going to lose all of the demand like we did in Perfect, because it was a homogeneous product, exactly the same. Then, because it's slightly different, we don't lose all of the demand. Good example here is restaurants. Restaurants are often in monopolistic competition, because you think of any town, there's lots and lots of restaurants, and each of them are slightly different. And that means that if one raises its price slightly higher, people will still go and eat there because they like that one. That's the one, that's their favorite one, and so they're not going to lose all of the demand, although they might lose quite a lot of it. And so we have an elastic demand curve, and it's really quite highly elastic. We also have lots of firms competing, and so each one has some degree of market power over the price, and so it's called a price maker. Because you've got a downward sloping demand curve, you can set the price, okay? But each firm is so insignificant that it's not going to affect the rivals, and so in that sense it's independent. And that's important when we get to the next market form called oligopoly, where we see that there's a dependence going on, but with monopolistic they're independent. And lastly, there's complete freedom of entry and exit into the industry and perfect knowledge of what others are doing in that market. Okay, so what we find here then is that because of those assumptions, we have a demand curve that is quite elastic. Okay, so in other words, if we were at a point here and we raised our price, we're going to lose quite a lot of our demand. Not going to lose all of it, it's not perfectly elastic, but it is quite highly elastic. And remember, the demand is always average revenue, and our marginal revenue curve here is halfway across this horizontal distance. So we always draw that half the horizontal distance. We put in our marginal cost and we put in our average total cost, remembering that we always draw our marginal cost through this lowest point of the average total cost curve. Now for a profit maximizer, remember, if they're profit maximizing, M for maximizing, they set MR equal to MC, which is at this point here. And so this is the profit maximizing point. And in order to sell that, they've got to go in up here, refer to the demand curve, and come across to the price equals the average revenue. At this point, okay, they're going for average total cost. So here's your quantity. Now we can work out our average total cost as we go up to our ATC curve, and at this point there is the average cost of 1 unit, and so the difference between those two is going to be the profit. And we make a profit because the average revenue is bigger than the average total cost. Now the key now is what happens in the market, because this is the profit that we're making, this whole area here, but what we see is that because of that profit, that the new firms are going to enter the industry, and as new firms enter the industry, the demand curve is going to move downwards on itself. In other words, because of new entry, the demand that faces each individual firm is getting smaller. Now remember, if we move a demand inwards, we also move in our marginal revenue curve as well. Okay, so our marginal revenue has also moved in at this point, and so eventually we're going to end up at a point where this average revenue is going to be, so we'll show that here, and so the equilibrium point, marginal cost equals marginal revenue, but now when we come up to our demand curve, it's got to be at a point where average revenue equals average total cost, and we can see that it's a point there where it is tangential to the average total cost curve. And only at that point would we find that average revenue equals average total cost, so therefore we're not making any supernormal profit in the long run. Now the difficulty is drawing this diagram, because it can be quite complicated. So what I'm going to suggest you do is you follow these steps in order. the first thing you do is you draw your average total cost curve and try to make it quite a loopy, as it were, quite a big loop on this average total cost as I've done there. The next thing you do is you draw your average revenue curve here, but remember it's got to be tangential. That's why I was saying that the average total cost has got quite a curve on it at this point. If you do that, then it's a lot easier. So this is going to be drawn here because we're not making supernormal profits in the long run. We then drop our equilibrium quantity down. So here's our quantity, profit maximizing quantity, and it's always got to be at this point in the long run. Okay. Once we've done that, we draw in our marginal revenue. Remember, half the horizontal distance. Now we have 2 points, because we're about to draw in our marginal cost curve. We now have 2 points. One, where marginal cost equals marginal revenue is going to be here, because that's where your quantity is going to be maximized. Okay, profit maximizing. And secondly, it's got to go through the lowest point here of the ATC curve. So now you have 2 points that you fixed for drawing your marginal cost. So it's going to come down and it's going to go up something like that. Once you've done that here, then check lowest point of ATC, check MR equals MC, here's your quantity. You go up here, and now you've got to identify this equilibrium, say that this is where the average revenue equals the average total cost, therefore you're not making supernormal profits. And by following these steps, you'll be able to draw this, which is your long run equilibrium in monopolistic competition.